Hello friends, it's Shari. Today I'm creating an interactive card using the new Summer Friends stamp set. So today I'm creating a Flippin Awesome card, which I haven't done one of these in a while, but I love making these because you get to make tiny little scenes that kind of go together. So I'm using Summer Friends, and I'm also going to use that pair of palm trees from Ahoy Matey. They were sized really well to go on these little panels. So I am just going to be stamping out all of my images in Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink on white cardstock, and I actually stamped all those twice, and then here I'm stamping a bunch more of those palm trees so that I can have a palm tree on each of my little panels. So here are all of my images stamped out. I have two panels of Summer Friends and then one with a bunch of palm trees. And I'm just going to get coloring. And I am doing some simple coloring here with a little bit of shading, starting with my strawberry and these two shades of pinky red colors. I'm going to use that lighter shade for the dark part of my watermelon and then pull in an even lighter shade to blend it out. There are a lot of characters on this card, so I'm trying to use some of those colors over and over again. Now I used this YG09 for the dark green, and then I pulled out my YG03 and it was dry as a bone. It needed to be refilled badly. So I pulled out some Olos. These are similar in color, and you're going to see me use these on the palm tree, the top of the pineapple, as well. And these are double-ended, so I have those two colors on that same marker. So I use that for the top of the pineapple, and then I'm moving on to the pineapple itself with that Y17 for my dark yellow and Y15 for the lighter shade. Now to the palm trees. I colored these with a dark trunk at first, but you're going to see here in a little bit that I didn't like it as much because everything just seemed all the same tone of brown. And so you're going to see me color some of the other trees a little differently. Now I did do the actual green part of the trees the same on all of them using these YG 2.3 and 2.5 Olo markers. So I colored the light color all over first and then came in with the dark, which is a little backwards from the way I have been doing. Now here is where you can see I redid those trees. I just thought that the coconuts kind of blended in with the trunk with those two dark colors. So I went in with an E13 for the trunk, and then I'm using that same YG 2.3 and 2.5 for the tops of the trees. And then you're going to see me pull in another Olo marker. It's just a dark brown, and this is going to be my coconuts. And this stands out from the trunk a lot better than that first one that I colored. And just for shadow, I just tapped it again with that same color. Now I'm moving on to my coconut drink over here, and I am going to color by pulling that dark color in from the outside edges. Then I will blend out with the next color, so this is E15. And then finally a third lighter color for the center, and this makes it look round like a coconut. For the inside of the coconut, I'm using a very pale E00, and then I'm actually going to pull in an E11 for the inside of the coconut. So it's kind of the same brown tone, but a little bit darker, so it looks kind of shadowed inside there. I will give that coconut drink a pink umbrella and then a teal straw. And actually that teal color is the same color I'm going to use for all of the straws for all of the drinks. Now for the glass with the ice here, I decided this was going to be some lemonade. So I'm using some yellows for that and the lemon up on the glass. For the glass itself, I like using that very, very pale blue, so that was a B quadruple zero, and I just kind of pull it down into the yellow. I don't go over the entire yellow part of the lemonade. For this little cocktail glass here, I pulled out some very peachy colored markers to make kind of a peach daiquiri, and then I'm using that same pale blue for the glass, just as I did with the lemonade. Now that they're all colored though, I want to add the cute little faces to these. And I'm just stamping these in some black licorice ink. Since my coloring is done, I don't need to use jet black. I'm using the sunglasses for the pineapple. There are smaller faces that fit on the glasses. So I have the lemonade and the little peach daiquiri there. Then I'm adding a face to my strawberry. I'm using the smaller face for the watermelon as well, so it fits nicely within the seeds there. And then I went back to my cool sunglasses for my coconut drink. And I cut them all out with the coordinating dies, and I'm just going to set them aside. Now, I did go through with some black ink and stamp out a bunch of the small sentiments in this set, and then now I'm giving them all speech bubbles. This speech bubble is the speech bubble in the Summer Friends set. It fits those 2-line sentiments there perfectly. And then I pulled out the All the Speech Bubbles stamp set for the other ones that were a little wider or a little taller than fit that speech bubble that comes in Summer Friends. And I'm using some River Rock ink to stamp all my speech bubbles so they are a gray color rather than black. Then I'll use the coordinating dies to cut all of these out. So I'll just set these little speech bubbles up here with my images, kind of putting them with the images that they go with. And then I can move on to my Flippin Awesome mechanism. So I cut the basic square out of white. I need to cut that decorative square. And then I also cut the mechanism out of white. Now I have 2 stitch squares and 1 stitch rectangle cut out of craft. We're going to use those to create our ground. But I need to cut 4 of the squares and 1 of the rectangles, and I just decided to pull out some of these Gleeful Gradient scraps that I have here. This is a collection of paper that all the colors go great together, so why not use these little pieces, and they're already colored for me. So I need to cut 4 of the squares and 1 rectangle. I love that the rectangle kind of picks up the gradient because it's a little bit longer. And then I can work on my ground. So I'm going to set that rectangle aside and we're going to do the squares first. Now I only cut 2 craft squares because I can use the tops and the bottoms to create my ground. And I'm just going to do it old school. I'm going to trace it out with a pencil and cut it with my scissors. And I put the 2 squares together to make it look kind of continuous, although none of these squares ever are going to touch each other, so that doesn't really matter. It's just kind of a fun detail. So then I flipped my squares over and now I'm using the top part as the bottom, and now I have 4 little sandy grounds to add to my squares, and I'm just erasing my pencil lines. Now before I add these to the squares, I do want to kind of grunge them up a little bit and make them look a little more like sand. So I'm using some dough ink and a small blending brush to add a little bit of ink to the top edge of my sandy hills. And then for some texture, I'm actually going to grab a Copic marker that is brown and just do some dots. So if you don't want to make a big mess with some splatters, this is a really easy way to add some texture. It's especially great on small pieces just like this. So now I'm ready to add each of these to the bottom of my squares. And I'll just use some liquid glue to add these to the bottom of each square. Once I have these on there, then I will add each of these colored squares to one of those white squares. And that will complete my panel and it will be ready for some cute little images. So now I have my squares ready to go, and I already laid out my images kind of on which background I wanted them to go on. Obviously, I wanted that bright pink strawberry or that bright pink watermelon to not be on the pink background. I didn't want my pineapple on the yellows, so I just made sure they were all on contrasting backgrounds. Each of the little squares gets one of the palm trees, and then, of course, the little sentiment that goes with each one. So we have the strawberry that will be first that says you're so sweet. Then we have our coconut drink that says I'm coconuts for you. Then we have our pineapple, and as you can see, I kind of flip-flopped which side the trees were on, so we had some more dynamic scenes when we flipped our Flippin' Awesome. So we have our pineapple that says I'm feeling pine, and you want to make sure that these images don't go past the edge of the white square. It can definitely go past the little colored square. I always like the look of images kind of going past the frame, but you want to make sure it doesn't go past the white square, especially on the left side because that's where everything kind of folds together. And then we have our watermelon. So now that we have those 4 squares ready, I'm going to take my mechanism for the Flippin' Awesome and fold it on the score lines that go through the center, which there are 4. And then there are also these two little tabs here, and they're going to fold in. That is where we are going to attach this whole thing to our card. So the reason why I want to go ahead and make this is because that rectangle that goes on that panel at the end is going to actually tuck under there a little bit. So we're not going to see the whole rectangle. You're going to see here exactly what I mean. So this kind of tucks underneath so that things don't get caught and it moves nice and smoothly. And that's why I haven't gone ahead and cut my sand for my bottom one yet. I want to kind of make sure I have it in the right spot. I'm also going to stamp my sentiment first. And you're going to see me actually tuck this back in here because I realized that I can't center this sentiment in the rectangle because we're not going to see the whole thing. So I'm going to tuck it back in here and mark where the edge of this paper is. So I know kind of our visual scene that we'll see. And then I can stamp my sentiment centered between that pencil line and the right side. And you can see this is why I stamped my sentiment first, so that I know where to cut it. If I had cut it with my original pencil line, it would have been too low and it would have cut off my sentiment. So that is always why I like to stamp my sentiment first and make sure I have space. Then I can cut it with my scissors and erase my pencil lines. And I'm just using the ink that's left over on my brush to kind of darken that up a little bit and then add my Copic dots to make it match the other panels. Now I can add this to that other stitched rectangle cut from the Gleeful Gradients paper. And then I can add this whole thing to this end panel of the mechanism. So I'll add some liquid glue over the back, and then you want to center it up so it is centered in that rectangle, but when it folds over, it's going to cover part of it up. And I like to kind of fold it over so I can see what my scene is going to be. I'm adding another pair of those palm trees and then these two little guys. So this card uses all of the summer friends. I wasn't sure how many I was going to be able to fit on each panel, which is why I colored so many of them, but don't worry, you're going to see me use them at the end. And then I'm going to take that happy summer sentiment and just kind of tuck it underneath. I don't want it too close to where it might catch, so tucking it underneath works perfectly. Now I can add my square panels. So I'm going to start with the one you're going to see last, and this one adheres right to that square on the mechanism. Now for the other ones, it's just going to adhere to these little strips, so I want to make sure they're held really well. So I'm putting 2 pieces of double-sided adhesive tape on each of those little rectangular areas, and I'm going to trim off the excess. And then this is where we're going to stick each of these other panels. So again, starting from the right to the left, I'll pull off that liner paper for this little rectangle here, and then I can line up this. You can kind of butt it up against that fold line that you created, and it will get lined up perfectly. Now I'm moving on to the next one, which is my coconut drink. And then finally, I can pull off the liner paper and add that first one, which is the strawberry, and that's what you're going to see first thing on the card. And now I can kind of test it. I fold that back over and look, it is flippin' awesome. Now for the card base, I'm using the back side of one of the Gleeful Gradients with this pretty kind of tealy green. It has the little stars. And I'm also going to use this kind of pinky colored one and cut out this decorative piece that's going to go behind my panel. I also need to cut out the little piece that goes on the tab that lets the recipient know to pull it. I seem to always forget this piece, so I'm glad I remembered. And I just cut that from a little scrap so it matches the same colors of my card, and the white will show through with that little arrow. So I'm just adding that piece of pattern paper to a card base. Then I will add my decorative rectangle right in the center. You could put it more towards the top if you were going to put a sentiment underneath, but my sentiment happens to be on the last panel of my Flippin Awesome, so I don't really need another place for a sentiment. And then those two little tabs, that is where we're going to put our adhesive to adhere this whole thing to the card. And again, since it's only those little tabs holding it, I want to make sure I'm using some strong adhesive. So I'm using that double-sided tape again. So these are going to fold over and wrap around the back side of that rectangle. I'm going to go ahead and pull off the liner paper so I am exposing that sticky adhesive. I'm going to fold this under and then these wrap around it. They're going to kind of hug it. And then we can center this up and make sure those two tabs are stuck down. And look at that. Perfect, flippin' awesome. Now to add a little more decoration, I am wrapping some twine around the top and I will just tie this in a bow. I think this adds some fun texture. I'm going to hold it with my tweezers so it's nice and tight around there. And then I can tie my bow and just trim off the excess on each side. I always cut it longer than needed because I want to make sure it's easy to tie. And then I have all of these friends left over, and it was looking a little bare to me, so I thought it would be fun to kind of sprinkle them around. So these two are kind of peeking up from the bottom, and then I will trim off their little feet there so they look like they're kind of popping up from below. I'm taking that extra pair of palm trees and I'm just going to tuck this at the top behind my mechanism. And you're going to see me test it, make sure it's not in the way of anything, which it's not. That back panel is going to slide right over top of it. And then I'm doing the same with this little pineapple guy, just kind of tucking him under there. I'll trim off the parts on the side. And then I had one more little speech bubble, so I thought I'd add that too. And that really kind of fills it better, and I like the way that it turns out with those guys kind of peeping out. It's almost like a postcard, but it's an interactive postcard. I just think that this is really fun, and it gives me all the summer vibes. And here is a final look at that Summer Friends Flippin' Awesome card. I love all the bright colors and the summer vibes, and I just think it turned out so fun. Thank you so much for watching. Have an amazing day. Bye.